The British Empire once ruled the world. So where did all the wealth go? E.M. Burlingame says the answer is the same seven-step predatory financial system now being run on the U.S., and the clock is ticking. Hey, welcome back to Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. Great to have you with me. Got an awesome guest for you lined up today. This episode is going to tie in with a couple weeks ago, the episode I did kind of introducing the city of London and sort of this global financial network. I said I'll be digging more into that, and that's what we'll start to do today. Before I introduce my guest, I do want to tell you once again about Jason Gagne and his Good to Go Body 90-day program, specifically designed for beginners who need some help, focusing on consistency over intensity so you build real strength without burning out or getting hurt. It's going to focus on, might sound like simple things, but foundational things like push-ups, squats, burpees, sit-ups, mastering the basics so you have that foundation so your body is ready for anything. Jason's a friend. He's been on this show a couple times. He's been on Lou's show as well. He knows this stuff. He's helped me out greatly over the years. You can get a discount, $100 off his program by using the link that you can find below this, wherever you're watching or listening to it. Okay, let's get into the show today, and I'm going to bring in my guest, who is E.M. Burlingame. He is an author, financial analyst, and his work exposes a 400-year-old system of predatory finance that has hollowed out empires and now may have America in its crosshairs. E.M., welcome to Finding Freedom.
Thanks for having me, John.
Thanks for coming on the show. And as I was telling you in the pre-show, and I told you when I reached out to you, but my background, I became a libertarian about 20 years ago, and most of our audience here on Lions of Liberty Network is libertarians, and a lot of us, we kind of came into this way of thinking through Ron Paul, and Ron Paul famously pointed out the Federal Reserve and how they were robbing us of our wealth through inflating the money supply, and I think over the years and listening and watching so many libertarian thinkers, I was like, something is missing here. Something, I'm not getting the full story. There's a lot of dogma. There's a lot of we shouldn't go to war. We shouldn't intervene in foreign countries because, X, Y, and Z, because it's just repeating the same libertarian dogma, not digging beneath the surface. And it was so eye-opening to me when I stumbled on your work and some others through Crypto Rich. He has a great channel, Rich Does Politics, digging into this global financial network. As you talk about in your great article, your great Substack, the Financialist Kill Chain, which we'll talk about. So just to kind of kick things off, if you could tell my audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we can start digging into some of this global financial network.
Yeah. Early in the Army, then the first tech boom, Silicon, .com era. Built a couple tech companies, then went to the investor side as in private equity and venture capital investment banking as an analyst. Got involved in the logic systems for algorithmic high frequency trading, then went into special forces in my early 40s. Went and did my doctoral studies in computational engineering and science and engineering to kind of understand where we are with AI, and then physical brain injuries caught up with me and got involved in my own recovery, and then in neuroscience and helping others recover from TBI. And then I started writing, through the whole thing, I was writing and trying to keep my mind working at all, functioning. And now that's pretty much what I do. I just write.
Yeah, and you're a great writer.
Like,
Highly recommend checking out EM's Substack, EM Burlingame. You'll find him on Substack by searching that. And you talk about this financialist kill chain, and in it you reference John Perkins, who was a former guest on this show way back, not on my show, on Mark Claire when he used to be with our network, who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which exposed this kill chain in developing nations. And your argument is that it's much greater than that. And, the great powers are not immune from this. Yeah. How long have you been tracking this, and how did you find your way into this theory?
I started looking when I was when I was an investment analyst. I started looking into the relation between geopolitics and local politics. But when you are doing analysis, and for my part was due diligence mostly on $1 billion, 100 million plus, 200 million plus to several $1 billion deals that are cross-border transactions and which have intellectual property transfer and all this complexity. You have to look at far more than just the financials. You have to look at all the risk factors and all the things that are impacting the likelihood of the venture being successful, to include all the little assumptions they write down at the bottom of the audited or otherwise financial statements, and you have to check and ensure the validity of those things. So when I say I was an investment analyst, what I did is I did due diligence, and what I was mostly looking for was
Mhm.
fraud, corruption, etc. So that's when this would have been the early 2000s, 2003 in particular is when I really started getting involved in that. I had a wonderful mentor, Jimmy Woo. And, that's when I started to, it was required in order for me to be able to provide solid due diligence and risk assessment for an investment. I had to start looking at all this other things that were ostensibly unrelated to the actual transaction, unrelated to the entities, but in reality were impacting those entities and the viability of the success. Everything from forex exchange rates to market manipulations to fraud to corruption to inputs to political movements to political instability to all of these things, conflict, war, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where it really began. Then I went into algorithmic high frequency trading on the logic, in the strategy kind of things. And so that broadened the knowledge from there. And then I went into special forces as a Green Beret and went away to war and then did targeting. And I started to notice that there was some correlations between who we were being sent after and who we were being in approvals to actually what we call exercise, right? To exercise the target and things that were happening in certain markets, certain trades that were being put on. And that's really where it got started for me. So back in about 2003.
So your your background has basically been designed to uncover this, essentially. You
To
have
see
all of
it.
the to
Yeah, to be
see
able to
it,
see
yeah.
it. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have all the different skill sets necessary to see it, which is
Mhm.
which is pretty wild.
Yeah. And none of that was intentional. None of that
Mhm.
I set out to do. I couldn't have imagined it in the first place. But
Yeah.
yes. And then I went to do my studies in computational science and engineering. I wanted to know where we were with AI, and it was my intention. And I was working on it for several years till the brain injuries caught up with me fully. I was working on developing a sophisticated algorithmic trading platform that took into account these, you know, I don't know. Are you familiar with Markovian blankets and Markov systems, Markov
I'm not, no.
kernels? So I won't go belabor too much, but if you boil it down, it's Markovian systems, or systems that are beyond what we can see, but they're impacting things that we can see in predictable ways, that we can know something structural, systemic, et cetera, is on the outside, moving in certain kind of ways that we can intuitively kind of understand, even if
Hmm.
we can't see them. And we can't see that, might be 2 or 3 layers out, but we can see the movement in a system that we know that the dependencies within that system aren't moving in such a way to cause these signals. So something outside that we can't see is causing these signals. That's a Markovian system, Markovian blankets, kernels, et cetera. It's brilliant space. Soviet Russian guy developed it, the concepts and ideas. But I was working on a algorithmic trading system that took into account, there was really a Markovian system that looked more for the thing, for the signals from things you couldn't see rather than just the pure heavy signal processing.
Hmm.
And this is 2015 and 2017, what I started to note, and then I was trading at the time every day in oil futures. And I started to notice that there was heavy, heavy, heavy manipulation coming in this Markovian way, nothing you could point your finger to directly. And what was it targeting? It wasn't targeting third world countries, no, it was targeting Europe, the EU, the UK, the Commonwealth, and
Hmm.
us.
That's fascinating. So, I guess maybe now is a good time to get into the steps that you outline in this kill chain to start to identify who some of these actors are who are below the surface, influencing markets and influencing global finance networks.
Yeah, you're going to have to start with the bullet points because I don't remember them off the top of my head. One of the problems with the TBI is I forget nouns and formal, and I don't have it in front of me here. But
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's no problem. So
yeah,
you talk about infiltration and
yeah,
influence,
yeah,
financialists embedding themselves in a country's leadership, posing as advisors or allies.
yeah, yeah. So that started for us in the 1600s. This was the Venetians and the Dutch, and they were they had created the long wars, the 30-year war in Europe, but there had been the 80 and 100 years wars before, but they created the 30-year war, which is, principalities and, for all intents and purposes, or on the surface, it was Catholics versus Protestants, but in reality, it was stable peoples versus stable peoples in principalities, free states, et cetera, et cetera. And it was creating this immense destabilization across Europe, such that and financial instability, such that the advisors, the infiltration that happened were representatives of the banks of Venice and Amsterdam and Rome that were coming in and making recommendations, suggestions as to how to reorganize the financial system, the political system, all the systems of your people, it's such that you could afford to continue the fight. So that's the infiltration, but they created the situation in the first place that then opened the door for their advisors to come in to help. And what came out of that is the Peace of Westphalia, Treaties of Innsbruck and Munster, 1645, 1649, which set the whole modern infrastructure, the financial kill chain infrastructure in place, embedded it in Europe. It took a little longer in what would become the United Kingdom because first they had to destroy the nobility and the monarchy there first, and they did that with the English Civil War by funding it. And then they were able, between 1660 and 1688, to finally get this financial system embedded through Parliament, through 7 nobles and the industrialists into the Anglosphere. So they embedded it right into the Anglosphere before the empire, what would become the British Empire, ever even happened.
Hmm.
Right when it was starting to take off. Mhm.
So who is the they that you're referring to?
These are the old Praetorians of Rome, through Venice, through Amsterdam, the um, uh, the Vatican, which is Second Rome, which was created in 1054 schism, So Catholicism before 1054 and after 1054 fundamentally different. I say this as somebody who went to Jesuit schools.
Hmm.
Give me one second. So this is the old Romans. This is the old Praetorians. This goes back to 312 when Constantine defeated the Praetorians at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. A section of the Praetorians who had survived, who had a vast amount of wealth that had been stolen out of the Roman Empire, that gutted the Roman Empire over 300 years, they went to the lagoons of Venice and built up Venice. By the 1400s, they had defeated Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade, weakened them, and then that was the 1200s, and then and created the Latin states that raped and pillaged Byzantium, and then the Venetians funded and brought in the Mongols. Miles Harris did a great piece on this. It's on YouTube, and to just just destroy and kill, just basically kill off vast amounts of the Byzantine peoples and aligned peoples, that weakened Byzantium enough such that by the 1400s, Mehmet II and the Turks were able to conquer them. But that brought down the shield Venice had, the Venetians had, and the Venetian Empire had on their eastern flank. And so they had to flee, and they fled to Amsterdam in the 1500s, early 1500s, and they established themselves as solid banking. But they were also, in the time before, in order to get the Fourth Crusade to happen, and all the Crusades, which actually attacked Orthodox principalities more than Muslims. That's historical. People can go look it up. They had also had to create, the 1054 schism, which was the breaking of the Orthodox Christian world into two halves, set up the second Rome in the form of the Vatican. The Venetians had funded and bankrolled and done all of that. Think the Medici, think the others. Give me one second. So the 1054 schism, 1200 crusade brings down, weakens Byzantium. The Mongols come in about roughly the same time, weaken them further. They're brought down by the 1400s. The Venetians then go to Amsterdam, all the way on the other side of the continent of Europe, establish themselves there. They build themselves up there. They create centuries of conflict on the continent. And then they got to flee somewhere else. And so they set up fleeing to the city of London. And in 1688, they were able to finally bring all that about. And they fled into, they rebased their headquarters to the city of London.
And with city of London, what you're talking about, you're not talking about actually ties to the British government, ties to Great Britain. You're talking about a separate,
completely separate, independent. That 1 square mile that was a separate territory under William the Conqueror.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that for the listeners who aren't aware of that. And
they've been an occupier. They've occupied the Anglosphere since 1688.
It's impressive to me, the level of history that it just reminds me, in the U.S., probably in Europe too, how we've lost an appreciation for history. It's not taught in public schools outside of memorizing some dates. Most of it focuses more on more recent history and the 1900s, civil rights and things like that. And we don't look back to these, massive changes, historical events where, you talk about peace of Westphalia, Glorious Revolution. These are historical events, but we don't look at them as major financial turning points. It's not. Nobody. I've never heard that.
It's civilizational turning points, not just financial. So the infiltration that we're all now coming, I hope, to the culmination of that infiltration occurred in the 1600s, both in the continent of Europe and in what would become the Anglosphere, and later, which would spin out of America.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go through the next 7 steps. I'll just list them off here, and then we can go from there. Step two, debt entrapment, pushing unsustainable loans, locking nations into repayment cycles. Asset identification. So valuable resources, land, industries, tax bases, and infrastructure are targeted. Just sounding a lot like the US, what's happening. Economic destabilization. Markets are manipulated to deepen the crisis. Debt for asset swaps. Assets are seized in exchange for debt relief. Extraction and exploitation. Wealth is drained through profit extraction. And then abandonment and collapse. The nation is left broken, its riches gone. So, at what step in that cycle do you think we are in the United States?
We are firmly in step 7. They are moving, and this, okay, so this also roughly, I didn't, when I was writing it, I didn't realize I was roughly, but this also roughly coincides with the unconventional warfare phases. And phase 7 in unconventional warfare is transition. That means you've already conquered the people. Now you're transitioning power to the new regime, the new system. That's phase 7 in unconventional warfare. It's called transition. What they're trying to do is they're trying to skip over phase 6 in unconventional warfare, which is civil war. What they're trying to do is just skip straight from phase 5, all the infrastructure for the theft, all the infrastructure, the erasure of the hereditary peoples, because you need them gone so you can take their assets and wealth. And you need the new slave class in so you can build them up for 3 centuries and then collapse them. So there's a movie that I didn't realize when I was watching it, Jupiter Ascending, and people can like it or not, but it's a metaphor for exactly this system where entire worlds are built up to rich complexity and then they're harvested. Literally harvested is in killed. Certain fluids taken from their body to add longevity and life to people, right? It's a direct metaphor for this financialist kill chain. So where we are right now is we are phase 7 of unconventional warfare campaign, and we're in step 7 of the financialist kill chain. They overlap with one another. It is collapse and abandonment. They are trying to lock in what they believe is an already conquered people. And what do you do once you lock that in? You take all their assets and wealth. You take everything that's there, and you retitle that to new owners, the conquerors.
Mm-hmm. So who are the conquerors at this time? I mean, are they still traced back
It's Rome.
to Rome?
But it's not that clean, right? It's other it's the financialists. It's this parasitic financial creditor class.
Is this like the BlackRocks of the world?
BlackRock's is an institution. It's one of their institutions. Yes. State Street, Vanguard, those are their institutions. The Fed is somewhat, but it is not necessarily, I mean, it can be done without a Fed, but it's not necessarily the case that the Fed was completely evil. The Fed, give me one second. In 1913s, maybe, et cetera, it was extracting this vast wealth that had been built up by the middle class, because that's what they're always harvesting is the middle class and the lower upper class. They're constantly getting harvested. And the truly lower classes are just getting eradicated. That's what's happening with fentanyl, et cetera. And despair and assisted suicide and all of that. Give me one second. This is a parasitic financialist class that operates in 2 interrelated ways. One, they commoditize and financialize absolutely everything, including human life. And then they convert that. Once they've done that, then they convert that to debt that's multi-generational debt. And now they've locked you into a debt slaver system. The way in which they maintain that system is ownership and controlling the judiciary and law enforcement, so lawfare in all of its various forms. So enforcement of the debts, right? The second piece is to that, the enforcement side is they use what I call the devil's legions, but it's the Praetorian Guard. And they are the ones that do the assassinations, that do the, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 59. I remember in the 1960s, well, not the 1960s so much, but the 1970s, I remember when the Hearst, Patty Hearst. I remember Getty. I remember the Getty heir. I can't remember his name now. Who had his ear cut? He was these were kidnapped. I remember
Mhm.
when Steve Wynn's daughter was kidnapped in the 80s. So wealthy elite have had their children kidnapped. They've had family members disappear. They've been, there have been assassinations. There have been assassination attempts. The wealthy elite are maintained by, they're under the control of this Praetorian Guard. And that includes the intelligence agencies and elite law enforcement and paramilitaries and security companies and all of that. But it's this shadow, you know, assassination, shadow threat of assassinations, character destruction, wealth, lawfare that destroys. The elites, just like in ancient Rome, are maintained in control.
Hmm. How do you think Israel ties into this? Because in my part of the world, when I look on X, everyone just blames Israel automatically for everything. That people say that Israel owns Donald Trump, which I don't necessarily agree with.
Ludicrous.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I've written on this. I wrote a piece. It's always the Jews or something. It's on X and Substack.
Mhm.
Um, they're scapegoats,
It's
right?
a distraction.
Well, Jewish leadership sometime right around the Crusades made a Faustian deal that they would be brought in as a managerial class because they were quite capable, and they would be brought in as a managerial class so that we would train our young men, our knights, our nobility to go fight in a war. Well, you needed since our capable men weren't going to be going into managing empires and kingdoms, principalities. You need to bring in a capable managerial class so you can send your men away to war, to conflict and war. Well, the Jews made a Faustian deal. They would come in as that managerial class, and every once in a while, when things got out of balance, we would pogrom them as a scapegoat. As the old term back then was a whipping boy. And they played that role well, and some of them become vastly wealthy, but they're just whipping boys. We kill every Jew on the planet, and there's only about 14 million of them or so. Every one of them, we'd kill every Jew on the planet, and it wouldn't change a damn thing.
Yeah, it just seems totally from a practical and logical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. The people who say that Israel controls the United States.
It's ludicrous.
It's
They are expendable, and they are being expended right now.
Mhm.
This British Empire, which is the occupiers of the Anglosphere, which are the continental Europeans, which are the Praetorians, which are Romans, at least ideologically Roman, right? See, the Roman Empire, the thought that the Roman families and the Roman power that survived the quote unquote collapse of Rome stop being Romans and stop trying to restore the Roman Empire is ludicrous.
Sa
It's
sa
almost in, Mhm.
I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say same thing with the British Empire, right?
Same thing with they're trying with everything that they are, our occupying masters and the ones who benefit from the masters are trying with everything they can through, bureaucratic warfare to try and, sustain the British Empire and rebuild the British Empire. Absolutely. And that's, with the same entities and, you know, shadow empire, right? It's called
Mm.
parallel systems in unconventional warfare. But, the parallel shadow governments that we have here are trying to, very much, yes, restore the British Empire.
So you talk about in the article with regards to the British Empire that continental Europe has been rebuilt 3 times over with wealth extracted from Britain and its
Through
colonies.
Britain. Yeah, through the Anglosphere. So the Anglosphere, we have been the Anglos, the Anglo peoples, the Scots, Irish, Welsh, English, Cornwallians, Welsh, East Anglians, etc. We've been, and then where we've gone, Australians, New Zealand, Canadians, Americans, we've been used as the muscle. We've been used as the innovators and the muscle to build out and sustain empire. But really, what is that? We've been out taking through force, taking control of collateralized assets, natural resources, labor pools, etc. And we've been out through both overt and covert operations, enforcing the contracts that the financialists have around debt and debtors.
Hmm.
We've been the bully boys.
Yeah. So a question that somebody would probably ask, listening along. Okay, EM. So this makes sense. What you're laying out here, I can see it happening in the United States. I can see this kill chain. I can look back in history and see when these items were checked off, and they're still ongoing today. But when we look at China and Russia, are they also in the crosshairs of the financialists?
They're in the crosshairs, but both of them have already gone through at least one harvest of their peoples and their economies. That's what communism was in Russia. That was a harvesting of the Slavic Russian peoples, not just the Russian, but the Slavic peoples. That was a harvesting, and it was also an attempt to eradicate them, to try and a harvesting and an eradication, so that we could get the tens of trillions of dollars of natural resources as collateral. And when I say we, I mean the financialists. I shouldn't say we.
Mhm.
To gain access to that collateral, right? The raw material, the immense resource wealth of the Slavic peoples, not just Russia. There's immense wealth all over, right? Ukraine, etc. But quite despite everything we've thrown at them, including the attempt now to start World War III around Russia, the financialists, failed to conquer the Russian peoples. Why? Because they're civilizational peoples, and they were able to fall back on their civilization. There's that classic scene in old Greek warfare, right, or Roman warfare, where the legion or the phalanx is falling back, and then finally that final slide of the sandals, and the spear point goes down, and the line stops, and then it starts pushing forward again. Well, the Russians, in 1999, they stopped getting pushed backwards, and Putin was put in. And Putin turned out to be quite different than the West, than the financialists who had helped support him up to that point. He turned out to be quite different than they thought, as did the Russians who backed him, because he's only one man. The reason that Russia was able to stop going backwards and start pushing forward, even though we threw 2 wars in there against them, the Chechens twice, and the Chechens can fight. Anybody who think Dagestanis and Chechens and all those, these are all Cossack peoples. These people have been fighters for centuries. They've been out on the borders of Russia fighting Russia's wars for centuries. They're unbelievably good fighters. So Russia was lined up, taken through the collapse and abandonment. It failed because they have to get you through the collapse phase before they abandon you abandon the old system, the old elites, the old structures. And now they own everything, and they take everything, and they throw you away. Doesn't matter if we're a billionaire or a prince or a king or emperor, doesn't matter. They throw you away. That's the abandonment. The Chinese went through it in the 1800s. And we, the Americans, tried to help break them free in 1867 by signing a favored nation treaty with them that made them part of the Westphalian system, the inglorious system. And we did that specifically to try and help them break away. So what did the British, sic Roman, sic SIC, right? To be read as, that's what that means. For your audience, terribly sorry, but
Sure.
it's not used very often anymore, but as a term. But what did the city of London do? 2 opium wars. It still didn't wipe out the Chinese. It tens of millions, maybe as many as 100 million Chinese died in the 1800s into the early 1900s of the opium wars. It disgusted Smedley Butler so much later that he wrote that and other things that are happening around the world. Smedley Butler wrote a book called War is a Racket. So they tried to do this with the Chinese. They harvested them once in the 1800s into the early 1900s. They survived. The Chinese survived. Why? Because they're civilizational people, and they could fall back on that, and they could stop getting pushed back, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so what did the city of London do next? Sent the Japanese in, and then World War II, and then the communists. Well,
Yeah.
almost succeeded, but then America came back. Good, and when I say America, I mean loyal Anglos came in the 1970s with Nixon and said, China, we'll help you break free. Here's what you need to do. And that's what Nixon's trip was about. So what they do, they cooed Nixon. He said, they tried to do me like Jack. What do you mean? Right? So instead of getting
Hmm.
assassinated, he just resigned.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So they tried to do it with the Chinese. I was in China in 2003 through into 2008 as an investment analyst, doing these due diligence deals, doing cross border stuff, and they were trying to gut China a second time through the investment banking. There's a great documentary called The China Hustle. Everybody should watch it. But they own Hu Jintao, and they own other top leading folks there who are squirreling hundreds of billions, in total trillions of dollars out into the spider's web, enriching themselves at the expense of the Chinese people, and they were being set up to be collapsed. That's what the whole real estate, building entire cities of concrete with no doors and windows or stairs. I know, I've seen them.
Hmm.
It was all a extraction of $70 trillion of wealth was extracted out of China in the whole China miracle. That didn't stay there in China. Only a fraction did. Well, turns out the Chinese did the same thing that the Russians did, and they raised somebody, Xi, and they put real power behind him to go clean all this up. So the answer to your question is yes, they've tried with Russia once. They tried again with this war. They failed. They've done it with China twice, once with the Opium Wars and the second time with communism. They tried to finally do the final collapse and abandonment just 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. Well, really started in the 2000s, 2010. They failed, or at least they failed so far. They started the collapse with us, and that's what the GFC was about. So the Anglosphere, they've been moving to collapse the Anglosphere. Really the first major theft of wealth and assets and debt increase, massive debt increase that then was the .com collapse. So they started to collapse us back in 2000.
Yeah. Things have moved quickly,
And
very
they moved
quickly.
quickly, but not as quickly as they thought it would because they thought the GFC would bring us all down. The problem is they didn't count on old families who understand these conflicts as living conflicts. Some of us were raised at the dinner table in our house that things that happened 300 years ago were like yesterday. Right?
Yeah.
Fukuyama is one person. These old we never listened to Fukuyama. The end of history, because there are these are not all wealthy families. They're just old families with a lot of intermarriages and a lot of interdependencies across centuries. And so conversations in those families, particularly, and again, whether they're in the Russian civilizational peoples or the Chinese civilizational peoples or the Anglo civilizational peoples, we have long histories. We are civilizational, complex, rich civilizational peoples. And we can fall back on conversations that are 300 years old that are just as relevant today as they were then. And they were just as relevant 300 years before that.
Hmm. So with regards to turn back to Russia, and I'm curious to get your take on what is happening with Ukraine. So it seems like to the outside observer to look, it looks like it's a stalemate, and Russia's lost a lot of fighters, and Ukraine has been massacred essentially. What is Russia's what are they trying to do here? What's their end game with Ukraine?
Well, they've stated it since 2022. The intent is to, Russians are a land power. We are a sea power. Land powers fight wars for very different reasons than sea powers fight wars. Land powers fight wars to attrit away their enemies' ability for several generations to come back and fight them again. And that's exactly what they've been doing. And for the Russians, this is a civil war that foreign powers created, that foreign powers are trying to turn into something larger. But for the Russians, this is a Slavic civil war. And they are doing whatever they have to do. And it's some of the battles that they're having are like 20-1 in favor of the Russians, and they have been for several years. So this is decimating the Ukrainian peoples, and none of this is targeted civilians or on the Russian side. It's targeted civilians, etc. Because again, to them, these are their people. The Russian civilization started in Kiev.
Mm-hmm.
They are called the Kievan Rus.
Yeah.
Right? So what the Russians are doing is they are disarming NATO. And they are financially breaking NATO. And unfortunately, they're having to do it, having been forced to it, at the cost of right now little over 2 million dead Ukrainian or Slavic men, and that's on both sides. So it's about 2.1, 2.2 million dead. We haven't seen deaths like this since World War One.
It's awful, terrible.
And it's all personal then, because this is family. These people speak the same language, the same these, right?
It would be like a civil war in the United States.
Correct. Well, it's the old, the second civil war that took place. Well, there's only one civil war that ever took place in the United States, but the American Revolution began as a civil war. That's exactly what it is. Revolutions are when the rebels win a civil war. It always starts as a civil war. But
Yeah.
In the American Civil War, something like 750,000 people died in proportion to the population at the time. That was a vast number.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them, a good portion of them, 40% or so, I don't remember the exact numbers. People can beat me up for this. But they also need to study beyond the obvious histories and get to the real numbers. But something like 40% of those people were fresh off the boat.
That would make sense. Yeah.
And many of them were Irish and German.
Yeah.
Right. So who's been fighting in Ukraine for the last 2 years, basically, because the Ukrainians have been slaughtered off, has been private military contractors from all over the world. It's equivalent to the American Civil War. It's been ISIS. We've been funding ISIS and Al Qaeda and private military contractors, et cetera, to go in and fight in Ukraine on ostensibly on Ukraine's behalf.
So why do you think Donald Trump hasn't just stopped sending any money, any assistance to Ukraine?
They'd kill him. He would be assassinated, and so would his family. But more importantly, the threat that keeps the Praetorian threat that keeps a head of state in line is not a threat to his life or his family's life. They've already committed to that before they ever took everyone down that pathway. If they're going to be antagonistic to the Praetorian regime, the credible threat that keeps the head of state in line is exactly what Sarah Adams and others have been talking about, and that's widespread mass casualty events here in the United States against the innocent Americans. That's how you threaten a monarch. That's how you threaten. That's why the King of England hasn't used his prerogatives to move against the occupation of the English and the liquidation of the English-speaking peoples. It's not because of threat of his own life, etc. It's because there are genuine, no shit, credible threats which were actually exercised under the guise of the global war on terror. The terrorist strikes in Europe were they're minimal compared to what they could have been. What were they? They were threats to heads of state. They were threats to judiciary. They were threats to the elites there, that if you push against this, if you fight against this, liquidation and collapse of your peoples, we will unleash this hell all over your lands against your people.
Hmm.
Look at how the leaders have acted since then. They've all capitulated to everything. That wasn't threats against them. That was threats against the people.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the King of England because one of the streams I saw you on with Crypto Rich, I believe it was you and Joaquin Flores, I think.
Mhm.
It was right after King Charles, or maybe during the time King Charles visited the White House, and there was a signal there that you
Yeah,
pointed out with the flag
several. Yeah,
being upside down. Can you talk about some of those
yeah.
signals that you observed?
It's a duress signal. So the flag being upside down is a very specific signal in the military. And in state level enterprises, right? It's not just military, but
Mhm.
if you have a consulate or you have an embassy or you have a compound or you have a military base and the flag is flying upside down, it means the enemies are inside the gate. It means I'm going to talk to you, but whatever I say, you need to understand that I am operating under duress. The enemy is already inside. So you conduct yourself, beware. And I
So
can
so
say whatever. Mhm. Yeah, go ahead.
so that's the U.S. government, though. That I mean, this is the Trump
That's
administration that put up that flag. This is the
in
Great Britain flag.
recognition,
Yeah,
correct. In recognition of what?
of
That the enemy is within the United Kingdom, that the enemy
yeah.
is in control of the castle.
Which from the outside observer, I think that's clear, right?
It's
But
obvious. But what happens is we've got 4 centuries of psyop telling us that the king's a baby eater,
mhm.
right? If
I
you're
mean,
gonna
that's yeah. And I honestly, until I came across your work, I despise the royal family. You know.
that's because people have
Yeah.
been trained and educated to do that over the last 5 centuries, 6 centuries. That's
Mhm.
the whole purpose of the Praetorians. This is the whole reason that Caesar Augustus moved across the Rubicon. He was invited across, by the way, but it was to deal with this Praetorian system that was already deeply embedded in Rome and had driven Rome to civil war for 20 years and was collapsing Rome in the first century BC.
Hmm.
And Caesar was invited across by senators, by nobles, by leading elites. Please come in. Now, Caesar himself, who was a minor nobleman, but a nobleman and a very successful general and a consul and all that other stuff, did not do what his successor, Augustus, realized was the only possible choice, and that was to convert from a republic to an empire and try to, accumulate to the emperor the powers necessary of the old Greek dictator, dictator, right? I can't remember the Greek, so forgive me. It's been a long time, decades since I studied Greek.
I'll forgive you on that.
And I was never very good at it, by the way, never very good. But that. Give me 1 second. Caesar Augustus became Caesar Augustus, or Julius Caesar became Julius Caesar, became the Caesar because of the very same place that we are in now. And Augustus followed after him and realized we have to go even further. And then unfortunately, the what Augustus did in his time, his successors were not as equally capable. And what happened is within the first imperial, still in the Julio Claudio line, immediately after Augustus, who was it? Nero was next, I think it was. I'd get him. Anyways,
Yeah.
I'm horrible with formal dates and names, etc. But by the very next emperor, the Praetorian Guard had already taken even more power, and so from the end of Augustus's era until 312, this Praetorian assassination psyop, slaver system was in complete and utter control of Rome until again, over a century and a half of effort, finally drew them all out into a battle at Milvian Bridge. We're in the same place. And what is that? Well, you have all this down with the emperor, down with the king, down with princes, down with anybody of any kind of sufficiency and capability to fight the regime. Do you think they wouldn't, if they're stealing the equivalent of trillions of dollars a year every year, do you think they wouldn't put $1 trillion a year into making sure that you hate anybody or anything that might be able to resist them?
Sure.
That's easy money. That's a given. Of course they would do that. But we act like they don't. We act like it's just some, that elite people are operating in some free form world that they, somehow miraculously become demigods, and they're not bound by the same threats and forces and lies and deception and deceits that we see around us every day.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, because we don't want to deal with the complexity of that, we need to get involved and to help them. We just believe the lie, as long as we have our comforts. As long as it doesn't squeeze too much out of us at any given period in time, we just bear it and we go along with the lie. And what do? We ensure our own slavery.
So what happens? What happens in the U.S. when that comfort goes away? What happens when the abandonment occurs?
Yeah. They're not going to abandon until they've fully collapsed. They can't. Right? So they have to fully collapse. It's where we have no capacity to reconstitute and restore ourselves, because the last time they got ahead of themselves and moved straight to abandonment, the Russians recovered. Last time they got ahead, and that was not a century ago or two or 1,000 years. No. That was 20 some odd years ago, 25, 26 years ago. The last time they moved directly to abandonment and skipped the total collapse, 2009 through 2012, the Chinese stopped moving backwards and started recovering. So they have learned from both of those mistakes, both of which have happened in the last 25 years, and in this millennium. All what's happened in this very early first 26 years of this millennia, both cases, and they've learned from that. They will not abandon us until they have collapsed us. They can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is, and Trump's just one man, but what is the power in the Anglosphere that help? And it's not just the United States. This is power from all across the Anglosphere. The power of the old families that helped get Trump into power again and get him out there, and his administration and his team of people. They are doing everything they can to ensure that we don't collapse. And that includes the rest of the Anglosphere, Canada, all the English-speaking world.
So what from a practical perspective, somebody listening to this show, what can be done as a US citizen, as someone who's watching this, to prevent this collapse?
Yeah, so that is the question, right? So all power is local. You need to get involved. You need to two things. One, realize that down with princes is a centuries-old psyop that has robbed us of the only powerful people on earth that could stand with us for us. That's one. Get over down with princes, because boy, all of this has happened when there haven't been princes. Right? Straight up. So that's one. So what does that mean? That means there are people who have, despite everything, been able to become some modicum level of elite. And they're locked in all-out conflict in ways that most people don't even frickin' have the beginning comprehension of. One, we need to recognize that. Two, we need to, and so, okay, that's one piece. The second piece is we as a people need to really understand our local community. I mean, fundamentally understand who's who, who's in what position, who's doing what, who's owes obligations to who for what. This is stuff we used to do in our communities before we did all this massive urbanization.
Mm.
We used to know exactly, okay, well, that person's saying that right now, but I know that they owe that other person over there a debt because of this thing over here that might have happened 3 generations ago. Well, all that stuff still plays out. So you need to get to know your own community. You need to know who the district attorney is, who the prosecutor, who the sheriff is, who the mayor really is, who the city council is, the school board, the board members of your major companies and financial institutions. You need to know all of that. And you need to share information with others. We need to know who and what our communities are so that then we can work with capable people in our communities to get rid of this. But in a conversation with Tommy Kerrigan I had just before you, I hadn't come to me quite this way before, but there is this indifferent malevolence that we have to fight. Well, how do you fight indifference? Particularly when it's, if we see malevolent, it's active malevolence, well, we go after it unless we're a coward, right?
Mhm.
But it's this indifferent malevolence that's like, how do you fight indifference?
Mm.
Whether it's malevolent or benevolent doesn't matter, but it's obviously malevolent. It's mutilating kids' genitals at 6 years of age. That's malevolence. But it's
Yeah.
this indifferent malevolence. Well, how do you do that? You have to be community oriented. You have to know your community. You have to ensure that there is no ability for indifference to lead or rule or control anything. You have to be committed, and you have to have other people, large numbers of other people in your community that are committed, that are not indifferent, that don't look the other way. And just that, you do enough of that in enough communities, you start removing this indifferent, you start checking the indifferent malevolence. Now you've made major impact. And you do that in small communities, you do that. So I live in a city here, but the city is made up of communities, little districts inside, etc. So you don't have to know the whole city and all that. You need to know your community within the broader, whatever structure that is. And then
Mhm.
this city is one within the state. Now, the capital's actually here in this city too. So, so it makes it a little easier. But let's say you're in one of these northern Idaho counties. Okay. You're in a small town or you're out rural, you're still in a county. Map all that out, right? The only way to fight indifferent malevolence is to be committed, to not allow indifference, this just casual activity and malevolence to happen. You need to make sure nothing's casual, everything's intentional.
Mhm.
And if they're going to come at you malevolently, they're not going to get away with it in this indifferent lawfare kind of way. They're going to have to come at you face to face. They're going to have to come at you directly and openly. And have the courage, because you're working with and are part of a community of people. This is the way we used to live not so long ago.
Yeah, and it's become, foreign to people because so much is online, so much is on your phone that people don't even know their neighbors anymore. The neighborhood block parties used to happen just 10, 20 years ago are fewer and farther between.
Well, and you're absolutely right. Give me 1 second. What's been happening is that we are being told through our phones and our media and et cetera that somebody else is handling it. Well, obviously they're not.
Mhm.
It's getting worse. So obviously there isn't some other political group or some political figure or some great lawyer, some great, prosecutor or district. They're not handling it. So we need to stop being indifferent. It's not somebody else's responsibility and problem. It's ours. We
Yep.
have to get actively involved. We have to know, no joke. We have to put time and energy in it. Okay, you want to stay on your phone? You want to be online? Great. Do research. You want to be a busybody? You want to be a gossip kind of great. Go get the real stuff.
Mhm.
Go find out, right? So here's the thing. These circuits for busybodies and gossips, that used to be a benefit to us. I remember when I was younger, right? I'm not too old. I'm getting older, but I'm not too old. I remember when I was younger, that old busybody lady who was a gossip, she knew a lot of shit.
Oh, yeah.
and it was real. Now, maybe her interpretation of what we should do about it wasn't always the best idea,
Mhm.
right? But she knew a lot of stuff. And oh boy, you wanted to know something. I go to the old lady's house down the street, right? Have a dinner. She tells us all kinds of things,
Yeah. The information is still valuable, right?
right? She
Yeah.
tells us all kinds of things. All of them are real. Now, again, her interpretation of what we should do about it, et cetera, maybe not, but the data itself, right? The information about, oh, so and so did this and so said that. And oh, this person, they were actually remember that thing back then? Well, there were these fonts of information that was real. All right. Well, that's all those circuits have been hijacked. They've been fed. They are intentionally being fueled and fed with lies.
Mhm.
But that circuitry to, that busybody, know it all, even, all that circuitry is with us as a species, the gossiping, et cetera, is with us as a species at this level, because when it is used right, it is a immune system mechanism at the community level. It's all being fed lies. So
Yeah.
don't just use the circuitry, rely on the circuitry, but don't allow it to feed lies. When things come into that informational circuit, go test it. Take time, look it up, go test it. You're never going to change the busybody's mind, etc. But what you do with that information, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the TV, the internet, X, all these
Your
different
phone,
outlets,
yeah.
all they wanna do is turn you against one another, turn you against the
So
person in
there's
your community.
correct.
Growing up in the '90s, it wasn't like that. Republicans and Democrats, that wasn't like, "Oh, we can't go to the same dinner party." Now, it's can't even be seen together. So it's crazy how quickly things have pivoted with that, and that influence, I mean, that's meant to happen. There's someone is behind the scenes putting that propaganda out and dividing us.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I want to be thoughtful of your time here. We're just about out, but I really do appreciate you coming on. We'll have you on again down the road. But before I let you go, can you let my audience know where they can find your work and everything you're working on?
Yeah. So go buy some books on most all these topics in different ways. Go buy some books on Amazon, or you can get a little bit more expensive signed copies on my website, ianburlingame.com. We're launching our own LLM here, so that it's fed on all my writings and corpus. And we're starting to look at bring in some other people's, so you can get a pretty unbiased responses from an AI. We're going to bring that on here soon. Um, People can keep an eye on my Substack or X, emburlingame.substack.com, or emburlingame on Substack. Excuse me, on X. And so
Right.
we're going to launch the LLM probably this weekend,
Yeah.
and people will be able to go and do queries and get, we're doing the best we can to make sure that the LLM doesn't lie to you and doesn't dream and doesn't drift the ways that the current stuff does.
Yeah. No leftist woke
Well,
infiltration.
yeah. So I want to be careful, if I might. We need the leftists. We don't have leftists right now. That's not who we're dealing with. That we're just dealing with malevolent people right now. But there's a certain amount of the leftist thought and idea that we need to be aware of, and some of it's interesting stuff. Some of it's good. Most of it's the enemy, but it's also the same for the right.
Hmm.
So for me, I am very much a centrist. We need a little bit of stuff on the left, and we need a little bit of stuff on the right, and we're shifting, adjusting back and forth between, depending on the big complexity. But I'm not an anti-left or anti-right kind of guy,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. EM, thank you so much for coming on the show again. Really appreciate
Pleasure,
it.
John. Yep.
All right. All right, guys, that is a wrap for today's show with EM Burlingame. Just a wealth of information. This is probably an episode you're going to want to share and one you might want to listen to again. I really encourage you to check out all of his work. Like I mentioned on the show, a podcast I've been listening to a lot is Rich Does Politics on YouTube with Crypto Rich. So check that out for EMs on there from time to time, as well as many other great guests. And Now that I've plugged someone else's show, let me plug us here at Lions of Liberty. If you like what we're doing here, please consider joining us. Become a Prick and join us on Patreon or Locals and get some bonus content. You can get some access to us. We have a monthly call with our top subscribers, so you can take part in that. We'd love to have you on board. And actually, one of our top subscribers, Carl, who we talk to every month, is one of the people that turned me on to checking out Rich Does Politics and led me to EM. So thank you, Carl, for that. And you too can have influence on this show if you join the Polipricks and join the Lions of Liberty here on Patreon or Locals. With that being said, guys, I will see you all next week with another great interview. In the meantime, keep going.